Hello, everyone. Any web novel readers, YouTube video trawlers, people interested in web novels, or first-time readers, and just visitors in general. This is going to be my first web novel summary on this channel, temporarily known as Drifting, and possibly in the future, web novel analyst and reviewer, abbreviated to WAR. And hopefully, my first web novel analysis and subsequent analyses will follow shortly behind this video. However, looking at how long this original audio was technically supposed to last, around 2 hours, that might take a little bit. So yeah, I really intend to make this a weekly thing. That's the goal. So yeah, when I do get that up and running, that's going to be quite cool. So when I first started reading the story, I knew I had something amazing on my hands. And the reason why I knew that is because the way that the author wrote the material, the topic he chose was just different than anything else. And I was just as excited when I started preparing this because I knew I would be able to share with everyone an amazing story. Now, before I get into the book, the name, summary, and other relevant information, I just want to say a couple of my personal thoughts on this project I've undertaken. Personally, I feel like at worst, a story thief and a gem polisher. The reason why is because my job and task currently is to summarize, and in doing so, bastardize such a well-written story for everyone's enjoyment, entertainment, whatever reason that you decided to watch this video. Now, originally I wanted to do a spoiler and non-spoiler version, and that might still be in the works. However, looking at how long it takes to produce a video and just with the way things are going, I decided against it, although it might change in the future, as I feel like I don't have the ability or even the time at this current moment. Now, there's going to be some spoilers in the summary, but I will give a spoiler warning unless I decide to chunk it out. But just letting you know, my analysis, when I get there, as well as possibly part of the summary, may ruin your first time reading experience. However, you're definitely welcome to listen in and watch my videos if you're not interested in reading or anything. So now let's get into some of the reasoning. Why do I feel like a story thief? And I really feel like a story thief because I've taken that which does not belong to me. I've really taken the story from the author. Like, they're the person who's written the story, it's theirs, and I've taken it from them, and I'm trying to introduce it to everyone. I feel kind of similar to Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, although I'm not really doing anything as grand. I also feel like a gem polisher, right? Because I'll be introducing everyone to some stories, hopefully some mainstream, but I'll be mainly trying to focus on non-translated ones, some of the ones that haven't gotten that much attention. But mainly, generally my standard is I try to pick ones that deserve to be read. Now, there's a very famous Chinese saying that goes, gold always shines, right? But in this deluge of online information and IPs, which stands for intellectual properties, it's always difficult to find that gold when it's been caked in mud, surrounded by rocks, or even to find the piece of diamond in the rock. And as a critic or analyst, I'll be trying to bring out the shine in these treasured stories. Unfortunately, I don't currently have the ability to write such an amazing story like some of these authors. Although I could definitely try. I personally feel like at the moment I don't have that imagination, their writing skill, and coming up with such ideas. And I just don't have enough experience in general. And so I settle for being the person to first appraise these gems, right? Or at least being one of the first to polish it. Now, in the past, I remember reading a story, possibly a manga, but I'm pretty sure it was a story, where two people were discussing what a hidden gem was, and it was such an interesting conversation. Now, the first commenter and the person who read it, really, really well-written guy. He said, he said something along the lines of, a hidden gem is best when it's hidden, since, it shines brightest when the light is shined in the darkest crevices of a cave. Those hidden gems shines brilliantly there, and once it's brought out into the mainstream, people start to leave grime on it, and then because of that, a hidden gem is best when it's hidden away to be discovered by others, right? You leave a gem in nature for others to find it off the beaten path. Now, that's an interesting thought. And the other commenter, he wrote quite succinctly, and then he had different ideas and from a different school of thought. He said something along the lines of, a hidden gem is best when it's shared. The more that people interact with it, the more that it gets polished and recognized. Now, it's very similar to the English saying, a diamond in the rough. And yeah, I thought that was just an interesting story to talk about in this tangent. And another quick analysis tangent I could probably go on would be in web novels, especially Chinese web novels. Traditional Chinese medicine is a very divisive topic, and especially in whether to teach it or not. The philosophy of that, but that's another reference for later. Possibly even yoga if you really want to get into it. And one last thing for context. I started this project while leaving my history of web novels videos unfinished, as I kind of got tired out, as I currently am now, of this as well. But I really needed a change of pace, so I might insert information like that may not pertain to this topic, but ones that I found interesting, and I included it in, or at least in the full audio I did. I may decide to chunk it up later, just to keep the spoiler and non-spoiler sections separated. But with the way things are going, I generally do full read-throughs. And one last note. Generally, a lot of the things I talk about, if I'm interested, I put a lot of this stuff in photos in a credits document below. And sometimes I go in tangents and explain my thoughts, although don't expect too much. It's really just more for documentation. But when I do find something interesting or whatnot, I really do go more in depth into it. So you might want to check out, if there's something interesting that catches your eye, go down to the credits document and search it up. You might find some results. I put a lot of cool sites, but it definitely is a slog because it really is just more documentation. I may decide in the future to do a video commentary and just look at the documents and thoughts as well. But that's really more for another video on BTS. I'll explain what BTS is later. I might explain it or just add it to the description box below, but really I'm not ready yet. But yeah, so I may decide to do something like that in the future, but right now at the moment, I just want to stay focused. So with that tangent out of the way, let's talk about the story. Now, the story I've chosen to share with everyone is called Tomorrow Has Not Arrived, or Tomorrow Hasn't Arrived, which is abbreviated to THA, as most web novels are. And that's my personal translation on the novel. The best machine translation that I've come across is Tomorrow Is Not Here. TISH is what it's abbreviated to. TISH, which is easier to say, but I prefer my own translation. Now, really briefly, the other machine translations could also be translated tomorrow is not coming, tomorrow is not close, or nearby. And all these translations come from the 4 original Chinese characters, the original title, which is Ming Er Wei Ling, right? And just to give a quick breakdown of that title, because I am going to do a quick analysis of that. The first Chinese character is Ming, right? And Ming generally means smart or tomorrow. And to understand what it means, the meaning of it, we have to really look at the next character, real quickly. Yeah, Ming, I think is the first accent, is the 4th accent in Chinese, I think. Just guess. Really quickly, though. Generally means sun, or pertaining to sun. It can also pertain to calendars, a calendar day, or just a day in general, or a date, right? But how we know is that when used in conjunction with Ming, Ming'er means tomorrow. And then we have the other 2 terms, Wei. Wei by itself generally means future, like 未来. That's generally how it's used. But a grammatical term, it generally means has not or hasn't. And in this context, hasn't really applies to the following term, or haven't, I guess, as well. Ling, that's the following term is Ling, and Ling generally means coming on its own. It's commonly seen in the phrase 欢迎光临, which is a welcoming greeting that's used in Chinese. This phrase is used in Chinese stores, shops, restaurants, and businesses. It's really a common greeting used for customers. When they step in the door, you'll often hear 欢迎光临. That's how they welcome customers. And so this title, 明日未临, translates to tomorrow has not arrived. And so now we're going to start getting into the background information. It's more timestamps and just future stuff. The book has around 5 volumes and an epilogue, which totals to around 1.8 million Chinese characters. I rounded up, of course. It's not as intimidating as it is. I'll give you some context in a little bit, but a little more background information. I like to say it's around 1.78. That's just the way I read it. But on the site, it's actually 1.718 million Chinese characters. So it's closer to 1.7, but I always often leave out the 1 and just say 1.78. And just some context on that number 1.8. It sounds intimidating, but really, this is not even like some of the longer ones. Generally, you'll see a lot of novels being 2 million characters and up. That's like an actual search category on the site. Any there are books. There's search terms for between like I think 100,000 or half a million to a million, and then the next level up would be 2 million, right? So 2 million. This is below that number, below the threshold of 2 million. So above 2 million, they're not rare, but they're not like super common either. They're not like dime a dozen. So there are quite a few books above this length, and this is considered a decently sized book, but definitely not out of the norm and not super long. So it is definitely readable, and I'll get more into the context about length later. But for now, just some references that would be similar to would be the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. Now, that book has 7, I think maybe even 8, which is like the Hidden or Destiny's Child, the play. But it definitely feels much shorter, and because Harry Potter's is 7 and this is 5, and it's probably much shorter than Harry Potter. But I just wanted to give everyone just some sort of reference. And another series that you might compare it to would be, in terms of length, would be The Song of Ice and Fire, also popularized by Game of Thrones, by George R.R. Martin. Now, just a quick side note. At first, I wasn't sure that was the title and series of the books. I've just heard it in passing, both George R.R. Martin, Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, and whatnot. So I went back to do research, and I was pleased to find that I was correct. Now, here's where it's a little controversial, but to be honest, I'm just going to lay this out there. I haven't read either series. I'm a web novel person through and through, so although I've had an interest in fantasy, I've gone through some anime and manga, in terms of all these, I haven't really engaged with the community, or really went that deep. And that's why I decided to keep my niche, or at least for now, start with web novels before I even go into those topics. So yeah, I might get burned by the book reading community, but if that's what it is, so be it. Now, personally, my personal opinion is the length of the story is closer to the length of one book in particular, the length of Crime and Punishment. Now, it's not that much of a slog, but around that 300, I think, to 500 page range, that's about what it is. And you can even compare the way it's published to the way Crime and Punishment was published, which is chapter by chapter. Very similar way of reading and how to read it. Now I'm going to start a little tangent, actually after this. So it's hosted on Qidian, like most good novels. And here's where the tangent starts. Now, Qidian is a terrifying giant of online publishing, right? So this is where the history of web novel really starts to leak out. This is probably around part 4. I really want to do a whole video on this. Qidian is a terrifying giant of online publishing. It's got 2 huge companies behind it. So Qidian is already huge, but the 2 shareholders are even more monstrous, in my opinion. One of those giants is Tencent, and if you haven't heard of them, which you probably should have, they're one of the huge tech companies in China. Big as Google, big as Amazon, in my opinion, even bigger. They're the leading company in China right now, and the CEO is one of the richest men in China. It's owned by one of the Ma's, and when I mean Ma's, I mean Jack Ma and Pony Ma. And those guys are billionaires. I'm pretty sure in the Western world he's called Pony Ma in a lot of the news publications, Forbes and whatnot. So if you want to search him up, Pony Ma. I always see him as Ma Huateng. He's really a man hidden behind the scenes. Ma Huateng is, you won't see a lot of headlines about him. He's really silent. He's one of those guys that he just doesn't pop up. He is a CEO, reminds me of Mark Zuckerberg, but he's even more low key than that guy. He's really one of the low key billionaires in China. In contrast to Jack Ma, the guy head of the next company, or not the next company, but one of the big giants in China. Tencent is a BAT company. So in economics, or if you hear any Asians or any people in economics refer to a BAT company, especially this is more a Chinese term. When a BAT company stands for Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, the 3 giants in the early days of Chinese online tech companies. Currently, Baidu is not as big. They're stronger than Google in China, but not much else. Alibaba and their ventures haven't gone that well, and that's the reason why Ma Huateng is one of the big guys of Chinese tech, and just in general, Tencent is huge. I don't think many people know how huge Tencent is, but it is giant, monstrous even. And Ma Huateng is a guy to focus on. As I said, he's low key, but he's a guy to focus on. And then the other company, I haven't even gotten to the other company yet, which I originally thought was Wanda Entertainment. I think that's how you pronounce it, or Wanda Entertainment. Originally confused it with, I think, Sangda Entertainment or Sanda, Sangda Entertainment. But Wanda Entertainment, I'll just use the English romanized version, I guess is what they call it, is a big film and entertainment company. I think they own amusement parks, cinemas around all of Asia. They're one of the movie distributors, kind of like MGM in the U.S. and the Western nations. MGM, Cinemark, Cinepolis is a luxury brand. Regal. Oh, and AMC, that's the large one. So yeah, that's, but it's not that. But it is just as giant. They did what some might call a merger, some might call a joint venture or cooperation. I'm just going to call it a merger for now, with a company called Sangda 网络. Its old logo used to be SDNA, very plain, very basic. It was your basic internet company. Another gaming company, but not as big as not. But in that sense, it may not have been as big as Tencent. Tencent is a huge distributor of like social media. They have a lot of users in its user base. Some of their ventures have been QQ and WeChat, which is big in comparison to like Sina Weibo, Sina Weibo. Um, and then it's not a streaming company, but it does engage in stuff like that, like Bilibili and Qi. But it's not that. But yeah, Sangda 网络 or just the Sangda, the parent company. I think in English it would be Shanda. The parent company's logo, just Sangda or just Shanda, just means big. It's very interesting the way the logo works. It's originally the character Rung or person, and they just took one of those calligraphy ink brush strokes across it, a red ink brush stroke across it. One of those ink brushes, Malpi, to mean big. And visiting their site, both the gaming, the online company, the parent company, I have to say that site was gorgeous. I normally don't shill for companies or what YouTubers might call potential sponsors, and I don't play much video games, so streaming is probably not going to be on the table. Although they're potential avenues. However, Sangda, their site had some amazing UI design. I'm going to go into that a little bit as well. When I visited, they really brought some of the. I felt like they really brought some of the experience not to the online Qidian site, as well as some of the other sites as well. Qidian, I feel, is more owned by Tencent, although it could be Sangda and their Cloud Area Holdings. But they really brought it to the mobile market, to their site, to even the US market sites as well, which I will get into a little later. But yeah, so just a quick mention. Their designer is a guy that goes by the name Nick Kuo. That's his English name. Honestly, I think he's probably a Chinese native. I'm just going to quickly mention I found out his native language was Chinese, with English probably being a secondary or professional proficiency. And that some could guess where I got it from, but I'm not going to mention it. So I'm guessing he's probably from China. It could be Hong Kong, HK, or Taiwan. But regardless, he did a really gorgeous job. Logo design, site design, he's one of the thing, and I think they really brought his expertise. If you're listening to this, people should hire that man. Hopefully I put his image on the screen. Don't know about that though. Yeah, and so with that, they have really taken over the Chinese, not just Chinese, but also Asian smartphone users and computer readers as well. They've really captured that market. And so yeah, those are the two companies behind Qidian. These two giant companies form what I like to call a consortium. It may be alliance, joint venture, whatever you like to call it, cooperation, but I like to call it consortium. That stand behind the scenes of Qidian. Yeah. I also forgot to mention Qidian, or a quick breakdown. Qidian, I'll probably have to edit it back in, means starting point. I may even have to cut this one out. So Qidian means starting point. How we get that is the first character Qi means to rise or to start from, and then Dian means point, right? And so that's what Qidian means. In the U.S. at least, and maybe even foreign countries and entities, it may go by the name Cloud Area Holdings Limited. Now that's a company under Sangda or Shengda. They own Cloud Area Holdings Limited. Now, just a little bit more background. I won't go too much into it. So Tencent is this giant. They're like the Facebook of China plus more. WeChat and QQ. They have the users. Shanda or Shanda is they also engage in gaming as well, different type of gaming, like pure video games. Tencent was more like mobile video games. Shanda is that as well as writers and entertainment. They might be the ones that built up Qidian as well, and their cloud, but their site doesn't reflect that, so that's why I think it's Tencent. Actually no, actually probably not. Actually, now thinking about it, but Shanda is probably it actually could be running Qidian. Is also known as Cloud Aries Holding Limited, and they sign a lot of writers. They have the experience and the expertise, and Tencent provides the users, and that's the split. Now, they're a big company, and as I alluded to, or might have even said out loud, they're not a company that's just stuck in China. They're huge in China, but they're not just in China. They're a company I think with all international reach already, or they have a huge potential for the internet market. And I've seen its reach. They're starting to extend into Western countries like the U.S. and England. Right, those are the two countries they've I think started to emerge into. Now, personally, I've seen them. I think they have some reach in the Philippines, and some potential ones that they might have would be other Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia and Singapore. Although I'm not sure on the situation entirely of those countries. And I think they might even have a little bit of influence in Egypt because there was an English writer that I think was under contract as well. So yeah, and the reason why I talk about this is just from an economic standpoint. I think they're a huge threat to a lot of Western companies in online publishing. Whether they're, but that's more like economic and politics. But in my opinion, they're an even bigger threat than Amazon. And the reason why I say that is because Amazon has a whole online publishing ecosystem with Amazon, Kindle, and Goodreads, and just in terms of IP, intellectual property, and online publishing. And some other competitors would be Apple. Those are if you guys don't know, if you read books and EPUBs, Apple created the EPUB file system, so they're quite big in terms of online publishing and online books as well. And then Google Play Store and Google Books is starting their own, but Amazon has their own great ecosystem. I was surprised to learn that Amazon owns Goodreads, right? Although it makes sense, right? Kindle, but that was a huge revelation for me. And Barnes and Nobles is stuck on somewhere in between. And Amazon started off as a book business anyway. So yeah, so a lot of older English books is under those guys' IPs and previews, as well as like English publishing companies, right? I think you got Puffin, McGrath. Yeah, sorry, I apologize. That one requires more research. But yeah, so back to China. So even in China, some of their closest domestic competitors in China would be Feilu. Also, in English, I think it would be Falu. That's English or possibly Romanization, as some might call it. And 17K. And I thought QQ Books was a competitor, but I was surprisingly wrong. I'll get into QQ Books a little bit. Although Feilu 17K or Falu 17K and QQ are quite large in China, they don't have the same user base, the same depth, or the amount of money being or IPs being exchanged as Qidian. Qidian is just too big a giant. There's number one, and you got number 2 and 3. But the reason why I say QQ was weird was because QQ is actually owned by Tencent. And if you remember correctly, or if you remember at all, Qidian is held by 2 shareholders, Tencent and Shanda, or Shanda. And QQ is one of the companies of Tencent. So, QQ probably just got acquired or merged. That's why I say merged. And the reason why I started to focus on it, it became a big threat. And I did research, not because I was scared, but I was just so interested, was because they made a move in the U.S. Translation market, which was they acquired Gravity Tales. Now, this is an old U.S.-based translator. They're not huge. They're not as big as Qidian. They just translate novels. But they really emerged in the online publishing translation scene. And I think this started to scare off a lot of Western sites as well. Because Gravity Tales was huge, but there are also some other offerings and companies as well. And you can see some of that Western translation competition being held in Wuxia or Wuxia world. I never know how to pronounce that in English. I'm just going to pronounce it Wuxia or Wuxia. Webtoons, I know Webtoons and Line is Korean, but you get the point across. I have a special. I feel a special connection to KDC. Kobatu Daisuki-chan. That's another site just known as Kobato-chan, I think, on .com. Um, those are some of the translation sites. There's way more, by the way. But I feel like these companies just don't hold a candle. They don't have the financial resources or foundation that Qidian has. They can just throw huge piles of money because it's Tencent and Shanda. And these guys are really just startups. American startups, they're doing okay, but they're nothing on the level of, the whole giant Chinese market. Like, I don't, as I said, if you don't even know about web novels, that just goes to show the distance between the two. And so the reason why I say they're pulling away from a lot of the Western companies is because some things that they might be compared to would be Tumblr, Wattpad, AO3 archive. AO3 stands for Archive of Our Own. In fan fiction, but they just don't have that foundation that Qidian does. And the only closest competitors I could think of would be Amazon, and possibly Google, but just Amazon in general because Jeff Bezos, billionaire. If he really wanted to, he probably could give him a good run. But at this point, I think China's got the infrastructure set up, and it's difficult to penetrate into their market, and they're just sending over their content to U.S. market, especially one would even say Bookwalker. Trash Taste fans would know from Bookwalker and whatnot. But I don't think even Japanese translations and light novels have the breadth and the depth that Qidian does. Amazon would give them a good run, but Amazon would be relying on the foundations of already published English novels, so it'll be difficult to license that. Whereas Chinese and Qidian, they can actively license and copyright their own novels, which you'd have to go through their company to actually get the IP. And what that means is Qidian, also including Shanda and Tencent, they have a lot of writers signed, tied to their brand or ship, as one might say. And when I say lot of writers, I'm talking, I think there should be statistics on the screen. Really quickly, I'm going to go to the site. Cloudairy. The statistics show, oh Lord, 2.5 million authors above that. I don't know if it includes American, but they have Chinese authors under their main foundation is Chinese authors, but they have started to sign small time English authors as well. And as I said before, they contracted one Egyptian author at least, and a couple Indonesian and Philippine ones. Now, the only other site that I could think of with that type of publishing and contract signing would be Amazon, but I don't think they've focused that much. It could be the whole Yahoo Flickr situation. But a lot of these writers come from Royal Road, Scribble Hub, some of the smaller sites, and then after they've written a large amount, they've accumulated a large amount, they republish back on Amazon, and then they kind of see where it goes. Russian writers as well have a huge grasp on lit RPGs. People who are acquainted with web fictions and web novels may be familiar with that term. But yeah, so that's really I'm going a little too in depth. So yeah, so that really ends it for the tangent. This is probably going to go in a history of web novels part 4, or maybe just an independent video as well. But I just thought that would be some fun things to say. So now back to the story. The author's timestamp as well. So back to the story. The author started writing this around 2019. I guess I'd gander around early 2019, although it could be like the fall of 2019. And he finished quite recently at time of writing, which is the 1st of July of 2020. Now, just future proving, and so people can have some context, this is really during the pandemic season. The pandemic, I think, starts around September or October in China and Asia. And then it isn't until around early 2020 that it really starts to spread towards Western countries. Now, the rub is I don't know whether he chose to write it during the pandemic, or if he planned to write it during the pandemic, or if he just started writing and then it just happened to be a good time. But for whatever the reason, I felt like he chose a really good time to write it because one of the things is the topics he captures a lot of cultural influences and important events and problems at this current moment in time, and just during this decade as well, or that decade. He does. I don't think, in my personal opinion, in analysis. I don't think he goes into the pandemic, but he does draw upon current cultural events, problems, and cultural figures, and he combines all this to turn it into an amazing story. He even goes into some anime and references as well, and which I think is quite cool. I think it was a great move on his part, just because it's one of the best times for people to read his work and for him to write it. As I said, I don't know if he planned it, but or intention, or it would just happen to be. But my personal opinion is just right place, right time. Not necessarily good fortune. I don't like to call it good luck, but just good timing. And so, just more on the book altogether as a whole. I mentioned before I get into the context of it, and here's of the length. Altogether, the book and the story comes out to 768 chapters, including author testimonials. Now, 768, what does that mean? Well, in context, right, at the very low level, the short web novels will go from between 500 to 100 chapters. Now, this would be like a novella size, like a chapter level book, like one of the first chapter books a kid might read. Of web novels, at least. These are your love stories. A lot of first-time writers, like this would be like children's authors and whatnot, but love stories and first-time writers write at this level. Their quality is still quite good. I find short novels are always good novels, because even though they're short, they're quality, right? These are first-time writers, love stories, and dramas. Then you have the next level up, which is Korean level novels. I like to call it Korean, but we'll just call it 300 mark or threshold. Now, a lot of 300 chapter novels, I call them Korean level novels, is because that's at the length at which a lot of the Korean translations have been at. Although possibly Arena, Seoul Station Necromancer, which is very similar to Apocalypse Cockroach. I'm pretty sure Apocalypse Cockroach is Chinese, and Seoul Station Necromancer is Korean. A lot of those Korean novels and translations have been around 300. I've read one at 150 and 300. They might even go to like 400, 500, but at the moment, most of them stay around 300. They do get longer. A lot of these novels, because they're short, they generally are quality, right? There are some without that, but a lot of the Korean translations turn out to be quality. I may get into more of the genre and whatnot later, but as I said, separate video, not at the moment. Now we get to some of the major thresholds of 500. I'm really going to skip around to 800 actually, because a lot of experienced web novel readers have a standard of how long they want the length of their book to be. Because if someone's starting to write it and they only have 50 chapters, it's really frustrating to have to wait week by week or even day by day if people are publishing daily. So like under 100 is some people's threshold, especially for some first-time readers and even English readers, like just pure English readers. Some and a lot of the Western web novels, especially on Royal Road Legends, only reach up to like 200. I say only 200 is an impressive number, but in comparison to the length of Chinese web novels, they go much further, more depth. Now, some experienced Chinese web novel readers, or even web novel readers in general, will start to reach 500, 800, 1,000, 2,000. But my threshold recently is around 800 to 1,000, and so that's what I'm comparing it based on. But yeah, shorter than 800, they won't read anything shorter than 800. Above 800, you start to get to what I like to categorize Wuxia or Wuxia novels. These are the martial arts novels, Eastern fantasy, cultivation, and even some fanfics reach this level because you get to a certain point. I'll do that in a little bit. But yeah, around that threshold, it'd be like 500, 800, 1,000. That's around this level, and that's the length. And this story is obviously shorter than that. If I didn't mention before, this is a short tangent as well. So yeah, I've seen books that go, another threshold would be that 2,000 chapter mark. If you could hit 2,000, that's a special mark as well. I think I've possibly read one or two 22,000 chapter books. I don't know if I finished it though. I know I've read ones that have gone that long, but I don't know if I could get that far. I've definitely read a couple, and even read to the point, I think 1351, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. I've read a couple of those. A handful, of course, but I've read a couple. I'm not going to mention it here, but maybe in the future I'll go into some of those. I'll give a quick hint though. It'd be Sword God, Commanding, I think Heavens, Goo, and yeah. So those are three. Uh, oh, Daybreak. Um, yeah, so that's 4. Oh, okay, there's Industry as well. And yeah, so that's a future. That's a reference for future me, and I might like cover those later. But like those terms, sword, uh, Gunaflon, God, industry. Yeah, I'm mixing some of these terms up, just intentionally. Well, as well as this the coach, athlete, Abbott. Yeah, okay, so no, there's a couple of 1600 ones. The 1351 though was special. I don't know why though. I don't know why that number sticks out to me. Yeah, I originally thought I saw 3,000, and doing research I did, and I guessed I gandered to guess upwards of 5,000 would be the limit. And originally, I'd say it would be around 5 million characters for a 3,000 chapter novel, right? 10 million max for the longest book. Now, yeah, that's my original guess. Now, I like everyone to think about a number or just how many chapters a max novel would be, or how many characters a max level novel would be. Mine would be 5 to 10 million. I don't remember. Keep in mind, 2 million is not rare, but that's considered reaching it. Most end around 4 at that level. You know, I've read one I think at 8, which is which is that 2,000 chapter book. Probably put on screen a couple of those, but yeah, 8 is probably just one of those that they only have a handful of. 10 million max. So if you've thought of that number and you have it in your head, characters and just chapter length, doing the research, the longest one that I found on the site, Qidian, was at least, oh wow, 20 million words rounded up. I think it's 19 and 3/4 or 19.75 million Chinese characters and 10,000 chapters. I originally did the math and I realized I did it wrong because Chinese, they do maths with 4 zeros. So it'd be 10,000, which is what? And then I think it's like 10 million, which is E. And then like I think 10 billion or something. I don't quite remember the numbers, but it's something like that. Whereas in the Arabic Western mathematical system, we use 3 zeros, which is, 1,000, million. Sorry, I skipped over. Yeah, no, 1,000, million, billion. That's the number. So I really thought it was 10 million, and I'd be like, wow, this is only like 2% of like the longest novel, but no, it's not. But yeah, so back to that book. 20 million Chinese characters, 10,000 chapters. Although I'm not sure on the quality of that. Now, in terms of chapter length, there's one really short note I have to make. Chapter length really is dictated by how long an author's chapter is. Some of the Korean level chapters, those things, like one Korean chapter is like possibly 5 Chinese chapters. So like those 300 quality chapters, they don't feel long because you're sectioning it off. But that 300 chapter Korean novel would be like the equivalent of 1,000 chapter Chinese novel. It just when you're scrolling so much, it hits different. But yeah, so chapter length is really dictated by the author. Oh, I probably should have mentioned this earlier. But each chapter, each web serialized chapter is about 3 pages worth of a book, give or take. It depends on author preference. If the author likes to write longer, it could go up to 5, 10, maybe even like, a full on chapter. And some of the short ones could go to half a page. It's really variable. And that's how I made the guess of Crime and Punishment. So now back to the original thing. Out of these books that I probably showed on screen, I've read one of them with about 2,000 chapters, and I think 8.45 or 5 million words. That probably gave it away, but maybe we'll save it for another time. I don't think I finished it though. So yeah, longest one is 19.575 million. Crazy, with the average one being around 4. And what this really brings to mind is strangely enough, is a college humor actually episode. I think now it's just Dropout. They said one of the longest fan fictions. I think they said English fanfic, but I heard fanfic was a Super Smash Bros. Fanfic, and that number really got up there. I think it was like 22,000 words or 20,000 chapters, and like maybe 10,000 words or 10,000 chapters. I don't know, but it was quite long, maybe 2.2 million. So I instantly thought, wow, this is the level, but that's considered like high level. Whereas the Chinese novels, they're really getting up there. Although the fanfics don't hit 10 million, they do. Some of them do hit the 2 million mark. I think there's like 4 that hit the 2 million mark, but they do reach quite up there. So yeah, I thought the Chinese market really is competitive, maybe even more competitive than fan fiction, Wattpad, and whatnot, because they have so many works. The statistics are crazy, by the way. It's like 7.6 million titles, 200 million users. I should really included that earlier on. So yeah, I'm trying to think off the top of the head if I missed anything. So in comparison, back to the point, 1.8 million, that 1.78 million of this book is really nothing to scoff at, right? It's still decently sized. Um, but as I said before, 2 million is quite common, and then this is not like super long. It's definitely not a book that you might want to first read. There's a reason why I did this. I did a debut summary on this one, but I think it's a good intermediary level novel, especially if you're maybe not the first one to get into. It could be a good one to start get into if you're starting to read the machine translations or just trying to read raw ones. But this it is quite long, but still great though. It's not as long as some of the longer ones, 800 chapters, right? So yeah, that really concludes this short tangent, and now I'm going to get into the author of the story. Now, the author of this story is it's written by the Chinese name is Reng Qiuming. Now, getting into the English translation, my Chinese proficiency is not the best. Okay, so I use a lot of machine translations like Baidu, um, Bing. Oh yeah, sorry, I think I forgot to mention Yahoo and Flickr. I don't know why that comes to mind. But yeah, so um, uh, Bing, Google Translate, Baidu 翻译. Those are the machine translations I use. Because my Chinese proficiency is not the highest, so I'm really guessing on most of these. So if I do get something wrong in terms of Chinese translation, put in the comments. I'd love to read that because kind of want to improve Chinese proficiency. But my best guess for what his name means. Oh, actually, especially for names, I'm especially bad at that because names take a special translation quality to it. It's like if you're trying to understand a Gaelic, an Irish name, a Russian name, an Afrikaans name, a Canadian or like Greek name, they all have like specific meanings to it. Like off the top of my head, like Smith could mean like ironsmith. Um, like it brings to mind Google and the namesake, but yeah, names are just particularly difficult to translate. But I'm gonna give him my best shot. Reng Qiuming, that's the full name. His pen name at least. Reng. I guess by the character on the left, which is called a Dan Reng Pao. Two strokes. Generally has to do with people. Descended from the Chinese character Reng. Now, what that means is it has something to do with people or persons. And my guess would be it means to recognize, like to recognize someone. I couldn't find any information that confirmed it, but that's what I guessed. Chill is something I'm a little more familiar with. It's autumn or fall. I can say quite. I can find evidence, and I could say quite confidently. Chill means autumn or fall. That season of the year. Now Ming is a little bit more difficult. When I put it into the machine, I didn't get anything out. It's just one of those names that just like don't necessarily mean anything. Like John. By themselves, they don't really mean anything. But in terms of context, what the machine translation gave out, especially I think this is from Baidu, I got the translation autumn drizzle. Now, yeah, if anyone could come with a better translation, that'd be great. But for now, I'm just going to go with autumn drizzle. Now, if you're interested in this work, you might want to check out some of his previous works. And he wrote works like, and the English translated titles, machine translated, of course. But I can kind of confirm is This Assassin Has a Problem and Magic Punk. Now, originally I wanted to not learn the Chinese name and pronunciations because that would take a while. Which was my original guess would be 这杀手有个问题 and 魔术少年, right? And then I wasn't even gonna guess on the last work that he did. But looking at the titles, they're actually not that difficult to read, which is This Assassin Has a Problem. The original title is 这个刺客有毛病. And then Magic Punk, the original title is 魔术朋克. Now, I don't want to really break it down too in depth, but I'll just do really briefly. 这个 means this, 这 is this, and then 个 is generally a measure word or is. 死客 has to do with assassin. 死 kind of sounds like kill or die. and then ke I think is thing, but ke is just a conjunction word that sticks together. This means assassin. Yo means to have, and then 毛病 generally means sick. Most people say 毛病 in the context of mentally sick, translated to problem, of course, because 病, that term generally has to do with sick in general, and then 毛 means something's wrong. 毛病 together generally means mentally sick, but problem fits quite well. Now, magic punk, 魔术朋克, right? 魔术, those two are conjunction terms. 魔 generally has to do with mysticism, right? Some sort of that fantasy. And then 术, I guess those are conjunction to mean magic. Now, 术, that word is interesting because by itself, it is a homophone for 法, which is like law, 法律, 法学, that type of stuff. And then 朋克, it's an interesting term because 朋, the two moons generally mean friend or 朋友. So that's 朋. And then 克 is a homophone or just an onomatopoeia or just one of those audio sounding words that just sound similar. 克, right? Like you can hear it in 夹克, or which is jack or jacket, which is Jacque, however you pronounce that French word. But 魔术朋克 translates to magic punk, and strangely enough, it reminded me of the anime Desert Punk. And he's currently working on a title called Sky Shroud Invasion. I wasn't even going to give my best guess at this because, yeah, I'm not getting that. But the translation is 天围入侵. I'm not analyzing that. I don't understand the terms, too difficult. But yeah, that's his current work. And yeah, if you really like the story, go check out some of his previous works. Those might be some ideas that you might want to look into. And yeah, that concludes the author. And now I'm going into the summary. Personally, I do a hybrid translation between the machine translation and some of my personal grammatical English edits. I mostly just do light touches though. Most of this, I really want to keep it in the author's words, but with translation, sometimes, you do it for ease of clarity. So now here's the translation. In the year 2130, in the future, of course, 100 years from now, 120 years from now, at date of writing, the sun has gone out and the earth freezes over. Lu Yuan, one of the last survivors of that frozen era, returns to the year 2125. He has 5 years to change the future, relying on the auxiliary light brain. For some context, I'm going to interrupt with some of these. Auxiliary light brain you can come to as one of those microchips. It's like in AI that generally you help, or in web novels, a protagonist would attach to his brain for computing power. Just to do calculations. That has accompanied him back to the past. And Lu Yan's decision to save the world is he decides to use video games. Experienced web novels will know where this is going. The name of that video game is Tomorrow Hasn't Arrived, right? So that's the name. And the setting and the plot of the game is that it's set during the time after the sun has gone out. It's a post-apocalyptic game containing a lot of the tech that, so here the author included a lot of tech that he may or may not write about. The technology he includes is nuclear fusion technology, artificial intelligent robots. That's the literal translation. I put it as artificial intelligence and robots, moon bases, Martian cities, and everything that has not been completed in reality. The machine translation says will first complete their technical preview in the game. I translate it as will appear in the video game. But yeah, so the main point is the main character or protagonist inserts all these technologies in the video game. And what that does is scientists, students, skilled workers, singers, and even all people who have hope for the future choose to enter this game one after another because of all the technology inside and just due to the high quality of the video game. I'll get into how he does that later in the analysis. And the author's words is just like navigators running to the sea without regret. Pretty cool. And the last sentence the author writes on the summary is, Lu Yuan, the main character and protagonist, says, I put the future of mankind in this game. So I might have, I don't think I slipped up, but in the future I might do slip up in both the analysis and whatnot, and say that the main character, MC, or the protagonist is Lu Yan instead of Lu Yuan. And the reason why that's important is because Lu Yuan actually has an important meaning. The name always has important meaning. I'm never good at it, but this one I can recognize really easily. I say Lu Yan because that's how I read it. But Lu Yuan has special significance. So when I do the summary, I really want to make sure I get that correct. But just a future note, I might read that. I'm also just going to do a clean reading of the translation maybe even a raw reading of the translation without my commentary, just so, if someone wants to read that, that'd be cool. I'll put that on BTS. So in the year 2130, the sun has gone out and the earth freezes over. Lu Yuan, the last survivor, one of the last survivors of that frozen era, returns to the year 2125. He has 5 years to change the future, relying on the auxiliary light brain that has accompanied him back to the past. Lu Yan then decides to save the world with video games. And the name of the video game is Tomorrow Hasn't Arrived. The setting and the plot of the game is set during the time after the sun has gone out. And it's a post-apocalyptic game containing technology such as nuclear fusion technology, artificial intelligence, robots, moon bases, Martian cities, and even technologies that haven't been completed in reality. They first make their technical preview in the game, and they appear in the video game in very high quality. And because of this, scientists, students, skilled workers, singers, and even any people who have hope for the future choose to enter this game one after another, just like navigators running to the sea without regret. Lu Yan, the last sentence the author writes on the summary is Lu Yan says, the main character Lu Yan says, I put the future of mankind in this game. Now that's a clean reading. So and then I guess even one last reading of the machine translation is, in 2130, the sun went out of thin air, and the earth falls into a frozen world. Lu Yuan, this last survivor of the frozen era, returns to 2125. He has 5 years to change all this, relying on the auxiliary light brain that has followed him back to the past. In the end, Lu Yuan decides to save the world with games. The name of the game is Tomorrow Is Not Here. After the sun goes out, the game is placed after the sun goes out, with nuclear fusion technology, artificial intelligence, robots, moon bases, Martian cities. Everything that has not been completed in reality will first complete their technical preview in the game. Scientists, students, skilled workers, singers, and even all people who have hope for the future choose to enter this game one after another, just like navigators running to the sea without regret. Lu Yan says, I put the future of mankind in this video game. Now, that's a complete summary. And like most stories, after a summary, there's always a couple tags. I like to give it a couple of my own tags, just so people have an idea of what this category is under. So this is a real quick timestamp of a couple tags. A couple tags I've assigned this is a semi-apocalypse novel. I'll explain why I call it semi. There are some elements of VR gaming, some intrigue, definitely intrigue involved. A Qidian search engine tag, I originally thought it would be classified under fantasy, gaowu, or a high-tech, or a parallel world. Obviously, it's science fiction, but now doing some research, it's definitely science fiction set in a future world, the year 2130. But yeah, that's the search engine tag. The way that the author writes the character is that the MC, the main character, is a normal protagonist. Now why I say the author writes it, or at least I feel like his intentions as a normal protagonist, he's not placed in the category of genius. He's not like a super smart protagonist. He's not an OP protagonist like some of the Korean and Japanese protagonists. And he's not a moron. He's not what TV tropes and overly sarcastic productions might call a crouching tiger, hidden badass. No, he's not one of those. The way the author writes it is he's a normal protagonist with, some long experience and, experience from the future, of course, and but normal nonetheless. He's not a genius. And he gets around that by using a tech assistant. He's a normal protagonist, but he's written in the Chinese elves trope. I'll explain most of that in chapter 1 of in analysis of chapter 1. But he gets around all that with a tech assistant, which is in the summary called an auxiliary light brain. And the auxiliary light brain, or the microchip controller, or whatever one might call that tech assistant, think of it like Jarvis from Iron Man. It's just a helpful AI, and it's really a tool to help assist the protagonist. And for some experienced web novel readers, this is not a system novel. The auxiliary light brain doesn't assign tasks. It's just a tool, a very useful tool with some high tech, but a tool nonetheless to help assist the protagonist in doing stuff. So yeah, and just one last couple tags is it's a love interest. There's some love interest involved, some romance and drama. That's really the last tag. Just like any good Chinese web novel or just novels in general, there's always some drama and romance, and that just adds, another facet to a really good book. And so those are the tags. But I feel like it's really important to mention what this book is not, because that's how you get a sense of what it isn't. Now, this book is not a harem, right? This is not where the Chinese protagonist gets 3 girls. No. It's not that story. There's a couple, Chinese web novels, Japanese web novels. They have that, which really goes to show, the bar. But it's not that type of story, which I think says volumes about it. From what I read, I couldn't find any sense of. I felt it was absent of racism. Yeah, I think so. One particular moment that really caught my eye was that there was a really intelligent and smart black character. They praised a black character, and that's special. It really goes to show the bar as well. But it's interesting to see an author praise an intelligent black character. Plays a very minor role, but the fact that it mentions that is particularly special. The reason why is, some Asian and Chinese culture is that people are xenophobic. They've been afraid of black people. The excuse, obviously it's still an excuse, but the reasoning and the excuse that's been given is, like with most cultures and countries, I don't think every country has gotten rid of racism entirely. Nordic countries are quite, xenophobic. China's quite xenophobic. Asian countries are quite xenophobic. You've got Japan. UK at times can be. America's definitely not got rid of its own. Germany, and one group of people I don't want to advertise, the French, Italians, are xenophobic and racist, against African people and like Turkish, Islamic, Middle East, and Egypt and Turkey have their own sets of problems as well. But Chinese, Asian, and Chinese people have been historically afraid of black people, or at least that's the culture. And the excuse is, their technology has advanced, but their culture has not. And here I'm going on a little tangent here, but the idea goes that part of the things that reinforce cultural norms is technology, right? When you only have half the workforce in the workplace back in the 50s and 60s, and even previously, right? It was a very male, men-dominated workplace. Not a lot of genders in the workplace. And so when you really free up the workplace, not just for genders, but for race as well, like when black people entered the economy, when German, Irish, Eastern Romanian, Eastern European peoples entered the economy, Latvian, Mexican, South American, Spanish people entered the economy, you really start to get a boost in production. And when you open that workforce up to all genders as well, I was about to say both, but I feel like in this politically, just not the right term in the moment. When you open the workforce to all genders, right? What it does is it allows cultural norms to change, right? Because when productivity increases when people are treated equally, right? Like you can't just have men being treated specially, or even just race being treated specially, because that just doesn't increase productivity. It doesn't motivate people. So cultural norms change with technology, and the excuse and the reasoning behind China's cultural norms not being up to date or just being as sensitive as the modern world, or not even modern, just the Western world, is because their technology is quite advanced, but their culture has to take the time to advance as well. But historically, you can see some of that xenophobia and racism in the Koreatown riots of LA. That's just a quick example. And a high five joke. Now, I don't know whether this is YouTube friendly. Worst case scenario, I clip it out, I cut it out. But the way the high five joke goes is, this is questionable at best, but I feel like it's quite tame and it's not like super racist. But the joke goes, a black guy goes to an Asian for a high five, and he shouts high five, very kindly, of course. The Chinese then gives him $5 in the hopes that he goes away, and the black guy just looks at the Chinese guy confused. Now you can kind of see the racist, well, not even racist, the undertones, but just the miscommunication between the two. But that's generally historically how the relationship has been. There is some fear and thing. I won't get too much into analysis. You could kind of tell from the thing, from the joke, but yeah. Maybe that might not even be a joke. That's more of a story, but that I think kind of goes to show that kind of relationship. And then moving on, I was really surprised to see this is not like well, I mean, it is. You have a male MC, a male. I think a male author, and so it's not gonna be a feminist novel, unfortunately. But it's not super male antagonist is like the center of the story. No, it's not that story either. As I said, it's not a harem, so it's probably not going in that direction. And so, because it's not that type of story, you see that a lot of the female characters get a sense of agency. They're independent, which is special, especially in a lot of web novels and Chinese web novels in general. As I said, it goes to show the culture, but it's getting there. Yeah, a lot of these female characters, they don't depend on the MC. They revolve around it because you have a male MC, male protagonist. And I was surprised. I was surprised in a similar way, but in an opposite way than when I watched Indiana Jones for the first time recently. I knew the story, but I'd never watched it. I was surprised at some of the cultural norms displayed in that movie. And it's just the complete opposite of that. Or you could even watch OSP, Overly Sarcastic Production, the video creator Red's take on Don Quixote. I'll probably save that for the analysis because that is kind of relevant. But yeah, female agency is a thing in this novel. And one last thing this isn't is I felt like this wasn't nationalistic. Again, some Chinese people can be nationalistic, just like most, any American, German, British, or Russian person. Nationalism is just a thing. It's one of the things that come with patriotism. And the reason why I say that is because the American characters in this story aren't purely evil. Foreigners are not evil. The British people are not evil. I don't think there's any British, but it's just American, which is cool because, they focus on America. But, no one is purely evil. And there are even some decent American characters that aren't evil, because, foreigners can be some of the protagonists in Chinese novels and just stories in general. There are generally two types of Chinese villains. Accented Cinemas also did a story on this, video on this. There are foreigners, the British historically, sometimes French, but, French haven't really done much in China. Indochina, yeah, but not China. The British and more recently the Americans, just, antagonism and cultural conflict. But off the top of my head, the other villain would be Hanjie. It was what it would be known as. Chinese traders, traders of the same kind, or even just race traders. It's kind of like how Americans see Benedict Arnold, right? Really big trader to the country. So yeah, there are some American characters. There may be American characters and entities that are the main antagonists, but they aren't evil. Right, they're antagonists in the sense that they get in the way of the protagonist, the main character, right? And even then he justifies it with good reason because he writes villains in the way that they all have their own agendas. This is a story where everyone has different agendas, and that's what causes conflict, not because people are evil and they don't like each other, or even racism. Although sometimes if there is, I didn't pick up on it. It's one of the first novels to feature, and I'd say an heroic American, but I think there's more than one, with even one or two supporting American characters, and that's surprising because you just don't see that. Like, I don't think there's a lot of American, even like American web fictions where actually you might, where you see like a Chinese secondary character, Asian of course, Indian maybe, but I don't think I've seen that. Especially Asians and Chinese Asians and American and Western web fictions have not been portrayed in the kindest of lights, right? I think Accented Cinemas did another one on the Chinese female villain, which is cool, but maybe not the nicest light. And the way he writes it is he praises other countries, he praises America, and in doing so, he praises his own country as well, which some people might argue nationalism. And I definitely debate on that. I definitely debate you on that. But yeah, I think it's closer to patriotism, or categorized as patriotic spirit, because he doesn't make other countries look bad. He more just praises them, and in a similar sense praises his own country. Whether that's his intentions or not, I don't know, and I don't think it is. But one could argue. And then so back to some of the other tags. As I said before, there's some drama, but this is a weird apocalypse novel, and I'll elaborate more just like very, very quickly. It's a future world. It's set in the year 2130, and it's a science fiction novel, as I mentioned before. But the reason why I hesitate to call it an apocalypse novel, I call it semi-apocalypse. That's a term. It's because that type of novel, the Frozen era stuff is really set in the background. That's more like world lore, world building, and is put on the back burner with various descriptions in the video game and story. But they don't really elaborate that too much until really later on, and even then, it's only in bits and pieces. I'll even elaborate more on the overall drama aspect later on a different video, but because of the spoilers, it might make it into a different video. Very extremely minor, though. I think it's okay to be put in a summary video. And just some of the things, just one last thing this is not, and a couple, it also includes a couple of recommendations and comparisons. This is not an HFY novel, and this is not under an HFY tag, which HFY stands for, if you don't know what HFY stands for, because it is in web novel circles, and I think even in Reddit, HFY stands for humans fuck yeah, right? This is one where they praise humanity, very humanity-centric, human rights, space civilizations and, galactic civilizations in spacefaring novels. But in that sense, it's very similar it's got vibes similar to Human Altered. I haven't finished the book. I've only read to around, I think, chapter 67 or 70, but, that's decently far, and I think I've read enough chapters to get a sense of the book. And the other two that it could be possible, or ones that you might want to read, would be They Are Small, and there was another novel, I don't know the name of it, but I think it was Human Meat or Human Burgers Do Not Consume. Or maybe it was just Humans Don't Consume, right? Quick disclaimer, I'm going to be honest here, never read the last two on Royal Road Legends, now known as Royal Road. They're small in Human Burger, so they might not be HFY, but they, reading the summaries, they have maybe some similarities. Now some comparisons. It's very similar to protagonists and MCs and main characters to an amazing writer called Who Cares. It's a funny author name, and he wrote a very cool novel called Rewrite. Amazing novel. You can see it on Scribble Hub. I think he's published first on Royal Road Legends. Very, very similar MC, but different direction. And one story I always like to recommend is Omniscient Reader, one that I'm potentially wanting to do a debut on. But Omniscient Reader is by this author its author has two Korean characters I don't recognize, but the machine translation is Sinchon, and that's I think the given thing. I apologize if I didn't read the name correctly. I don't understand Korean. Two more things, but this is more of a major note. One last note, one of the two last notes, is that this hasn't been logged into the database of novel updates, and because it hasn't been translated. So if there are any translators who want to pick this up, I highly encourage you to do so. Right? It's so amazing that I really wanted to cover this novel as my debut summary and analysis. Instead, because there are definitely other giants I could have covered, like The Great Storyteller on Webnovel, any of the Coach novels by Ling Hai-Ting Tao. The Winner's King is a great one, which is abbreviated to TWIK, or The Godfather Champions, which I think is an abbreviation of GOC, but I don't think anyone uses that. Blue Butterfly's King's Avatar, which TKA, I think a lot of people have seen the anime, is pretty famous, and more. But I wanted to focus on one that I would be proud in, and I thought this would be great to debut. And the last thing I want to mention is it's another return to the past. It's a do-over novel, as one might call it. But it's, how most do-over novels, if you've read some web novels, have a lot of business aspects involved, tycoon aspects involved. But it really tones down less of that, and it's got more of the drama aspects to it. And so that really concludes most of my quick summary, and I go more into analysis and the rest. And spoilers abound. What I do is I go into the volume chapters and drama, and analysis as well on a little bit of drama. Very minor spoilers, but, that might not be something you want to hear. So I might split the video here. Now going on to some analysis and spoilers on the drama tag. Very minor. Extremely minor, of course. I don't think it'll impact your reading, but, very sensitive about that thing. One note on the level of drama. It's been toned down by one of the organizations in China, which some people would call the Chinese Censorship Committee. The Chinese Literature Regulation Committee. One of those fancy Chinese naming systems that they used in Soviet Russia and even now. I don't like to talk much about it just because I don't like deriding people, organizations, and it's one of those organizations. It's one of those organizations And it's one of those organizations that if you mention their name, you get on their radar. Especially if you do a Google search, right? It's like, why are you searching this term? Why do you need to know this, right? Need to know basis. And just to get any curious parties in trouble, I do put some interesting links in the Google document below. Give me one quick second. I do put a lot of those information in the Google documents below, like the CIA, FBI. But some acronyms that you could search up, equally search up to get yourself in trouble, just like I did, and they might like put you on a list. Would be international and U.S. Mostly sticking to U.S. though. International might be like Interpol, MI5, MI6, GSG, CS:GO terms and whatnot, or Rainbow Six Siege. But U.S. ones would be the CIA, FBI, NSA, the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, AEC. Those ones I'm kind of really scared of, or at least it was interesting. FCC, the Federal Communications, FTC, Federal Trade, IRS. Just a little bit more. DOJ, DOD, NGIS. That's an interesting one. Navy Intelligence and SIGINT. As I said before, if you want to see more, I put a lot in the credits documents, and you can search it to learn more. And a whole slew of other government acronyms. Like EU has their own Interpol, I think. But yeah, because all of these novels are on a Qidian platform, and they're all in China, right? They are regulated, and I think they're covered under the China state-run General Administration of Press and Publication. I'm pulling a lot of this information from Wikipedia, by the way, and I think the Chinese title is 新闻出版总署新闻出版总署 I think that's right. And just a really quick breakdown what I guess it is. 新闻 is definitely news. 出版 is probably what they're releasing. 总 is type, and then 署 is probably the organization, or probably organization. I'm looking at organization. And they do have an internet section as well, but that's the paper and literature, press and publication. So I guess that'd be the organization they'd be covered under. But they are also covered under. There's also an separate internet censorship as well, or regulation committee. And that would be the. Sorry, give me one quick second. That would be the Cyberspace Administration Security of China. And there's a couple of other ones as well, but I know Xi Jinping ran reading from Wikipedia. Xi Jinping ran a couple of campaigns in 2013, and they've really cleaned up the online publishing industry in China. One of the terms that people would call it would be the Great Firewall, because China's good at building walls, and one wall they built is the internet. And so one of the works that got caught in the crossfire, quite a famous novel and example, is Iris, which stands for I Really Am a Superstar. Really big work. A lot of Western influences. I think the author's name, I don't know the pronunciation, but I'm going to give my best guess. It's Tang Yu, which the English translation has been tasty. And there's a cool CK Talon photos and whatnot in the credits document, and probably on screen. But the Chinese idiom goes, you kill the chicken to scare the monkey, right? Or in English, it would be made an example of, right? So Iris, this novel was made an example of just for some of the questionable things they found in the book. A lot of the romantic intimacy and interactions, no drug use, but they really want to differentiate themselves from like Hollywood, where they commercialize, and capitalism, they commercialize sometimes drug use, cigarettes, and I think cigarettes is okay though. Drinking, alcoholism, drug abuse, they don't really encourage that. And then romantic interactions and intimacy, right? They try and regulate that a little bit more. And ever since they shut down Tang Yu and his I Really Am a Superstar, the whole scene became more tame. Like, people weren't, I don't want to say we're not afraid to step out of line, because people still do. But it's more the fact that, they kind of knew that there were some things that they weren't supposed to write, is the best way to put it. So in the story, the romantic interactions have been taken down a notch. So you might find in the drama scenes, the romantic scenes, the author wasn't able to write a lot of intimate scenes, a lot of romantic intimacy, and a lot of intimate actions. Right, a couple come to mind. I'm not going to say he writes. I'm not going to say whether he writes them really well or not. But I'm just going to say that there were some really great moments in general. But what this does is it really puts the focus on science fiction, and I really enjoyed reading the science fiction. That's why I stayed. That's why I kept reading this. Now you'll get to some of my analysis in the volumes. Although the science fiction is great, the drama is what really makes it so amazing to reread multiple times over, second, third, and fourth time. I've only read it twice, of course, just because it takes a lot of time. But in the story, and by the author, you can still find like maybe I think you could still find just hints of romantic interaction. In my personal opinion, of course, it could be more than what I think. But I have my own thoughts about like romantic interaction in books. Again, analysis video. That's saving that for analysis video. But those romantic interactions that seem just quite innocent. And so that really concludes the drama spoiler section. Really a lot, just more background information, to be honest with you. Now I'm going to move on to the volumes section, right? Volume 1 is really the introduction. I don't think it has a title. It would be Tomorrow Is Not Here, Tish, or Tomorrow Has Not Arrived, or possibly none at all, right? It's approximately 130 chapters, double the length of some of the later chapters. Definitely like double to 50% the length of some of the later chapters. But this is where the author really starts his focus. He really picks up his stride later on, but he started off strong. That is what I'm going to say. So when I started reading this volume, I thought it was a bit of a slog. He really puts a lot of effort into the characters, so you either get really super invested and interested in the characters or not at all. At least in my personal opinion. My personal emotions and state at the time may not have been the best, though. So as I said, I generally gave him a pass for it, as I really didn't know what to expect. Decent author, been reading a while, interesting topic that he covered, a fascinating summary, and then from the way he wrote, it was just different. There was definitely some drama, and I felt that was what can make it a little difficult. And just one little side note, although I might be biased from being what I hesitate to call myself, which is an experienced reader or veteran, the reason why I say that is I've never read any of Jing Yong's work. He's one of the giants of Chinese web novel publishing. He was either 70s, 80s, or 90s. But he wrote things like the Proud Smiling Wanderer, and like maybe I think like Wandering Condor or something. Huge novels in web novels. And I never read that. I'm not what some might call the old guard. I'm not an old monster. But I think I've personally read my fair share of books, so I'm definitely past that newcomer novice stage. And I like to call myself, or I like to think of myself as the new generation. So that's pretty cool. And so my opinion may be biased in that sense, just because I have a little bit of experience. I've been reading for a while. I won't mention how long, but yeah. And so if you want more of the Chinese explanation, you can go back to either earlier in the summary, or if this is a separate video, to the summary video. As I said, so, oh shoot. No, I think I did give a former spoiler warning. So here is even more of a formal spoiler warning. I will probably, some of the volume titles may give spoilers, and I probably do a little spoilers. But as I said, this is more of an outline, so if you're interested, this might be some direction and some context to what you're about to read. So volume 2 is called, my translation is called The Fire of the Sun. The Chinese title is 太阳之火, right? It's around 374 chapters, of which 20 of them are free, and the rest are what they call VIP, or paid for chapters. And it covers a lot of nuclear reactor technologies and some intrigue. This is where the author starts to really build up a lot of tension, a lot of characters, and he writes them quite well, in my opinion. And it's really cool to see the direction it goes to. There's a lot of content in the first two. This is the longest chapter. Half the book even, right, is focused on volume 2. And really a lot of the action scenes really start to end up near the end of volume 2 and volume 3. So if you're not excited by then, it may be time to put down the book, at the end of volume 3 at least. But a breakdown of the Chinese title, 太阳之火, because this is, analysis. 太 太阳means sun. It's a conjunction word meaning sun. Tai by itself, that individual character tai, generally means large, big, something of the sort, a large amount or big, or even old, right? Or I think the term would be grand as well, even, but I could be wrong. And then yang, I've never seen yang be an independent character. I think maybe for sun's ray, but yang is generally, I don't think, independent. It's generally always in conjunction with tai. But tai can be with other words, like tai re tai, like extreme would be. But yeah, taiyang, yang is always with tai. And so those two words in conjunction mean the word sun. Then you get to 之火, which means fire of. 之 means of, like of something, and then 火 means fire, right? So 太阳之火, if you literally translate it, to be son of fire, but with the way Chinese grammar works, it's just fire of the sun. And then you get to volume 3, which can be translated to Babel Road, but I think a better translation would be Road to Heaven. The Chinese title is 同天之路. It has 60 chapters, and it starts to focus on more of the game aspects. It goes into the background of the video game, the future, and other interesting scenes that the author really decided to include. Very fascinating stuff. Very descriptive. Very well written. Now, just a breakdown of the terms. As I said, I try to keep this less spoilers because I just want to give you guys an outline. But so I'm not going to go very in depth, but I'll give a basic summary. 同天之路, that's the Chinese title. Now, 同天 generally means heaven, and how that breaks up is 同, that individual character, means to open up, I think, and then 天 generally means sky, or it can even be used as the word heaven, right? 知, as I mentioned, so 同天, together. I think the machine translation from Baidu is direct access to the highest authorities. 知, as I mentioned before, is of, and then 路 generally means road. I can even break down the characters of 路, but I'm not going to. A little bit later then, maybe. So then we get to volume 4. I think the best title would be Earth's Last Journey, right? Forgive me for the pronunciation of this. Two terms I don't recognize. But the Chinese title is 地球装模旅行. 地球装模旅行. Total of 80 chapters. Volume 80 chapters. Oh, okay, so volume 3 was the shortest one. Volume 4 is more the average later length of the chapters. We're really getting into the end game here. All of volume 3, volume 4, volume 5 is all VIP. So it's all VIP, which means you have to pay for them. Generally, I'm not going to mention other things, but the testimonials and the epilogue are not. But yeah, so these 80 chapters are all VIP. So just a quick summary of what happens here. This is really where the author puts in some interesting ideas into play. A lot of the foreshadowing. He throws in some cultural references that are quite great. And he talks more about how the story develops. He makes time pass by, and you see character development and some fascinating story ideas. But just a quick breakdown of the title. 地球 generally means Earth, right? How that breaks down to is 地, that Chinese character, means ground, earth, dirt, land, or place. And then 球 is just ball. And the way that this comes out to is very similar to how English uses geo. Geo, like geocaching. Gaia would be something. And like Earth, in the way that Earth, how Earth was named, Earth in Greek. How people call geo, like there's some terms that like geo means like dirt, right? So like Earth is kind of like a dirt ball, right? Because Earth is one of the planets that wasn't named after a Greek god, like Venus, Jupiter, Mars. So yeah, Earth really symbolizes, like Earth is special, right? Not just because it's home, but the way we call it in terminology. It's very similar to dirt ball. Even colloquially, we call it the blue marble. So in Chinese, it generally means dirt ball. It could also mean ground ball, the land ball, or even like our home planet. Even one could say that's what it translates to. But the more literal translation is dirt ball. 庄末 generally means end, death, demise, finish in the sense to end. And then 末 I think means last, final, or terminal, as in final or incurable. And together, it felt like that formed the term last, 庄末. And then 旅行, 旅 by itself generally means travel or vacation. That's generally what the term means, having to do with travel in general. And then 行 is just a conjunction word. It's a homophone for another word called bank, right? 营. But 旅行 generally is always in conjunction with each other, and it just means to travel or journey. And altogether translates to Earth's last journey. And then the very last volume is called The Stars in the Fog City. The Chinese title is 雾都全星, 雾都全星. A total of 95 chapters. This is the last stretch. And it's one of the longer ones. He puts a little bit more effort. I didn't. I'll get into it in a little bit. So I didn't really read this chapter for various reasons. One of which is that this is a chapter that the author. So as I mentioned before, the author inserts a couple of anime, culture references, and characters. And one of those influences ends up getting a whole volume. It's not a fan fiction, but he pretty much makes this volume a tribute to another web novel, The Lord of Mysteries, A Lord of Mysteries. And that's one of a couple reasons why I skipped this volume. And I'm going to be honest here. I didn't read this volume, so I didn't read the full story. One of it's because I was kind of tired. I wasn't interested with the way the author was writing, and I don't think I could have made it through volume 5 because I felt like I got most of the good parts between 1 through 4. I got most of the content. However, there might have been some important and great scenes that I missed out on, and information that would have been cool to read. But I felt because I didn't read Lord of Mysteries, I wouldn't be able to get into it. One is I couldn't get into the Lord of Mysteries itself, and two is I wouldn't be able to get into this story, this volume as well. Because I felt that even if I did read it, a lot of references would have gone over my head, and I just would have missed out. So yeah, that's really cool. So a quick analysis on the title, or just a breakdown. Originally, I thought 雾都 was an inseparable term. But looking back, it's not. 雾 generally means fog, right? So, or even mist, although I'm pretty sure they have a different term. From what I've been informed from a couple friends I talked to, 雾 is the distinctive term for fog and mist, but I'm not 100% sure. It's generally used in the term 海雾. I think there's a term called 海雾, which is sea fog. And then 都, that's not the way usually people read it and it's written, but in this context, it's 都. What that means is city, capital, metropolis. And it can mean in a grammatical term is entirely, which is 多, but because it's pronounced 都, it means city, capital, metropolis. And an example would be a city called Chengdu, right? And so that's a city in China that uses the term 都. So 雾都 means fog. And then you have 全, 全星, that means galaxy or various stars. Now, 全, I'm pretty sure is a measure word for a group of, or like a group of, in the following term, stars. Although I originally thought it was 群, like, for a group of people, but it doesn't sound right. So I'm pretty sure it's just 全. And then 星 just means stars. So altogether translates to 雾都全星 is the stars in the Fog City. And Fog City is I think an important place in Lord of Mysteries. And then finally, there's the epilogue. It totals around 7 chapters, and this is the home stretch. He ended it really well, I thought. So in the author testimonials, or in one of his final thoughts chapters, he wrote that he could have written more. I personally think that he wanted to end with the 8th chapter, or reserve the 8th chapter for some of his thoughts on his book, his thanks to various patrons and readers, his editor, and like it's just his wrap up. It's his wrap up chapter where he gets to write about what he thought about the story. So basically his concluding thoughts and anything else he wanted to add on. And I think the reason why he did that is because, in Chinese, 8 or 八, or I think it's 八八 in Chinese, means generally has a connotation of money, right? And that's my guess and analysis on why he chose to end on the 8th chapter. And I definitely would have loved to read more, but he ended it in a good place. He brought a lot of closure to the stories, to the characters, to a lot of the storylines. And I thought that was a really good place to end. And with that note, it really wraps up my summary of Tomorrow Has Not Arrived, 明日未临. And just a very quick PS or postscript. And this is more for BTS audio. as I said before, I generally record these things in full. First time, this is probably my second full video, but then again, my videos are like 30 minutes to an hour long. That's the audio clips I work with because I'm an idiot. So yeah, I felt that. Well, when I first started, the first time I tried to record audio, I recorded for like 3 or 4 hours straight. My voice throat wasn't used to it. I haven't talked to people that long, so I kind of ruined my voice a little bit, or just yeah. So I re-recorded I recorded the audio for like 3 hours, and I kept re-recording like this 1 hour period, and this audio itself is I think gonna run 2 hours. And every time I recorded and I got it wrong, I deleted the audio and I re-recorded. I originally wanted to save everything, but I realized that saving everything not only would take a lot of storage, but it would take so much time to listen and edit, and I just didn't have the time. So I deleted all of it, knowing that I would chalk it up to what I call experience. Even in Chinese, they would call it a learning fee, right? You have to do something to gain experience. And eventually, it came out to the audio recording you get to now. Although it may not be perfect, I think it's the best accumulation of all the attempts I've did. So in total, I probably recorded around like I'd say I'd highball it at 20 hours, but it's probably closer to 5, 10 hours in total. Although with the length and time I've put into this, I wouldn't be surprised if it was 20 hours. So yeah, that really is some of the background of my voice and so not my voice, my recordings. And so yeah, that ends this video in BTS.